So, I know what you're thinking. Why in the world am I doing this preview at the very last minute instead of yesterday previewing the 6 games that is going to be happening tonight in MLS? Well, there's two simple reasons. The first reason is that the league did not publish the article talking about the playoff scenario and the seeding that is at stake coming into tonight's action, and I heavily rely on that article kind of talking about what is at stake in each of the game. And although there are some games that I already know in terms of what is at stake in the playoff scenario, there's also other games that I actually don't know about that, and that I don't want to kind of just do a video where I'm guessing in terms of how each of these teams, what is at stake for them and how they're going to clinch the playoffs, and then have to do another video later talk about the playoff scenario and kind of just say, oh, you know how I talk about in the preview about how this team can clinch because of that? Yeah, I was wrong about that. I'm going to have to kind of once again revise that in that kind of video. Now, the second reason is that last night they also announced that the San Jose Earthquakes versus LAFC game is going to be rescheduled, and they actually did it in a very short notice. Like, they literally announced the game that's going to be kicking off today at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific, and by the time that article dropped, it was less than 24 hours before the kickoff game is actually going to happen. And that, I know I already talked about the Quakes versus LAFC back in Friday's preview, but since a lot has happened ever since that day, I'm going to have to once again do a preview again, which means that I'm probably going to have to do a preview this morning too. And in some way, I mean, I would have had to do a preview today either way by talking about the San Jose Earthquakes versus LAFC game. But still, at the end of the day, you know, today we are going to be talking about these 6 games kind of on a bit of a short notice and at the last minute. And that, you know, I would say in terms of these midweek games that obviously are makeup games in terms of what's going on this regular season, this is kind of like the opening act of Decision Day. These kind of results can really tell a lot of story and can really change the compression of what we're going to see on Decision Day, which is why these 6 games I definitely are going to really keep an eye on very, very closely. And at the review, I of course will kind of talk about how exactly these games and what each of these teams, what are they going to have to fight for heading into Decision Day, and what they already kind of fight for and already kind of clinch as they head into Decision Day. So the first game I'm going to talk about is the 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific kickoff between Orlando City versus Columbus, as this game is going to be between Columbus, who is 11-5 and 5, and Orlando City, that is 10-8 and 3. And this is a game that is all about getting at least one home game in the Eastern Conference playoff, because whoever can win this game is going to clinch their spot of at least being in the top 4 of the Eastern Conference, which means that, as I said, you're going to at least have one home game that is going to be playing in the Eastern Conference playoff, and that I'm pretty sure both of these teams would really want to have that, since, you know, both of these teams are very good at home. On the road, you know, they're not as good as they are when they're playing at home, especially if you ask Columbus, where this season, you know, all their home wins and all the wins they got in the MLS's back tournament is part of the 11 wins that they had this season. Like the 5 draws and 5 losses, only one of them out of the 5 draw and 5 losses did not come at home, and that all of them are actually on the road. So it is kind of very important that both of these teams need to have at least one game at home. They want to make a deep playoff run. So yeah, should be a relatively interesting game. But if I want to make a prediction of this, well, I am going to make a prediction about this game. I'm going to say Orlando's going to win this because, again, Columbus, this is a team that just, for whatever reason, they struggle on the road. And even though they are getting most of their starters, if not all their starter back in this game, I'm not quite sure if Caleb Porter might think about playing a lot of them, since, you know, this is a bit of a short week for them, and he pretty much gone with the best squad as possible in that game against Philly, and that was a very physical and demanding game. And that coming into this game, short rests, there might be some tired legs against Orlando if he decided to kind of start the same 11. But also, Orlando is very good at home. I mean, they rarely drop points at home. In fact, I don't think they even lost a single game at home this season. So I'm banking the fact that that is another factor of why I think Orlando is going to be the favorite coming into this game. But either way, both of these teams want to win this game so that they can potentially clinch themselves to at least be in the top 4 and at least have one home game that is going to be in the Eastern Conference playoff. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is Minnesota versus Chicago. So this is the makeup game of a game that was literally canceled at the very last minute. Well, I wouldn't say canceled, but more like postponed at the very last minute a couple of weeks ago because a couple of Loons players actually got tested positive for COVID-19, and literally with about 1.5 hours to go, they literally decided to postpone it. Now, this is a game that obviously, if you are a team that is in the bottom 5 or those 5 teams that is fighting for 2 spots in the Eastern Conference, pretty much 4 of those five teams, and those team that is not named Chicago, is going to be rooting for Minnesota. Because obviously Chicago, even though they technically are not going to clinch the playoffs, if they can get a win against the Loons, they can go as high as 9th place and will be 3 points above the red line heading toward decision day, and are going to be in a very comfortable spot in terms of making the playoffs. But if they do lose this game against Minnesota, then the table is basically where we're at right now. And judging how tight the Eastern Conference playoff is, and that the position between 9th through 13th place in the Eastern Conference is only separated by 2 points, boy oh boy, there's going to be a lot of chaos that is going to be happening, and there's going to be a lot of people that's going to have to do a lot of math in terms of talking about how each team can actually make it to the playoffs. And those teams that is below the red line, how are they going to find ways to get resort not only in their game but also in other game to punch themselves into the playoffs, and how those teams above the red line can stay above the red line with some of their games and getting resort from there, and also some of the other games around. But either way, we'll get to that when we get to decision day. First of all, as I said, all those teams that is not named Chicago that is fighting for those 2 playoff spots is definitely going to be rooting for Minnesota. Whereas for the Loons, I think they also have something to fight for in this game too. And no doubt that game between SKC versus Minnesota that got canceled is a huge benefit for the Loons, because not only the fact that we don't have to play against probably the toughest opponent we're going to face in the last 3 games, and kind of avoid Adrian Heath to do the most obvious thing he's going to do, which is act that game like it's a throwaway game and just play for a 0-0 draw that it doesn't even work. These last 2 games for the Loons should be winnable game. And if this is a team that wants to get at least one home playoff game, they need to win these last 2 games against Chicago and Dallas heading into decision day, which is why, I'm going to say Minnesota will win this one, because, again, Chicago is a team that does not do very well on the road. And I know the Loons are struggling in terms of their attack, and also the fact that they've been very lucky in terms of some of these past couple of games. But hey, it's better to be lucky than sometimes dropping result. And at least I will give credit the fact that even though the Loons have been kind of lucky in the last couple of games, some late goals resort, at least they've been finding a way in terms of getting a resort, despite the fact that, again, the attack is clearly not clicking the way that I like heading into the playoffs, and the fact that the defense is holding strong despite there's also injury in terms of that department. And speaking of injury, since even though we have a ton of injury to deal with, at least this team is still doing well enough that they are in a position where if they can win their last 2 games, they will at least clinch a home game that is going to be at Allianz Field. And who knows, if other resort goes in their way, they might not even finish 4th place. They might be even finish in the top 3 spot if they can, of course, win these last 2 games. But it's going to be starting in tonight's game against the Chicago Fire. But moving on, in terms of the very next match, is Nashville and FC Dallas. So both of these teams, of course, met just a couple of weeks ago with Nashville winning 3-0. And I will also say that this is the matchup of the non-invitational MLS is back tournament match. And for those of you that don't exactly know what that is, basically both of these teams did not make it to the MLS is back tournament, and that they kind of got kicked out because of the fact that they had a bit of a COVID-19 outbreak during that time. But I'm still kind of coming up with this fun name by saying that this is kind of the non-invitational MLS is back tournament game, and that, as I said last time that both of these teams play in that game, it was a resounding win for Nashville, winning 3-0 against Dallas. And that coming into this game, Nashville has a 7-8-6 record, while Dallas had an 8-7-5 record. This game also kicks off the same time as last time at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Although this game is not going to be on national television, so that we don't have to really worry about the fact that this game is not actually going to kick off at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, and that I know last time it kicked off like somewhere like 8:55 p.m. Eastern because of the fact that it was a national televised game. But yeah, Nashville, obviously they are in a dogfight right now with New England for that elusive sixth spot in the Eastern Conference. And the reason why I say that's an elusive spot is because that's the last spot in terms of a team avoiding playing in the play-in round in the Eastern Conference. And that if they can, of course, able to get a win tonight, they, of course, will get into that sixth spot. And they'll tie... Or, yeah, they get a 3-point lead over New England in terms of that spot. Now, for Dallas, they themselves are also fighting for chances to at least have one game that is going to be host in Frisco. They're currently actually tied with LAFC on points per game and are still in hunt for the 4th spot. In fact, for Minnesota, I didn't mention this in the preview of this game just a moment ago, but even though they're currently 4th in the Western Conference right now, they only have a .03 points per game ratio over LAFC right now in 5th place. And that's the same goes with Dallas, with them both having a 1.55 points per game heading into this one. So the margin is definitely very small. I mean, there's really no margin for error for Minnesota, where they do drop points in this game against Chicago. Depending on if Dallas is able to win their game, and also later tonight if LAFC is able to win the game, then Minnesota can really find themselves from going from 4th place in the Western Conference to dropping all the way down to 6th place in the Western Conference. Now, that being said, this is going to be a tall task for Dallas to face against a Nashville team that, after what happened in the last game, I'm pretty sure Luchi Gonzalez haven't forgot about that, and he's trying to use that kind of as a motivation to his team, knowing the fact that, hey, we got absolutely outbeat in the last game. This game we need to, of course, get a bit of a response and trying to get some revenge over Nashville that was just all over them, but it's not going to be easy against a Nashville team that I'm pretty sure Gary Smith's squad is going to do the same thing as they always do throughout this season, and they're going to make their opponent life an absolute nightmare to try to break them down and suffocate them on the attacking end. And that I won't be surprised if this is going to be a low score game, as it is the case for most Nashville games, where they don't usually involve in a lot of high scoring action. Usually a lot of their games are like 1-0, 1-1, and 2-1 kind of result. And if you're in Nashville, that's fine, because that's kind of the way that they, of course, got to the playoffs, and they're going to try to do it in this game against Dallas. And that because of that, I'm going to predict Nashville will win this one. And the other thing that I think give them an advantage, besides the fact that they already know how to beat Dallas and pretty much dominate in the last game, is the fact that Nashville has a very good home record. Dallas does not. They really struggle when they're playing on the road, especially their last couple of road performances that has come nowhere near in terms of a team that should be belonging in the playoffs. So yeah, Nashville, I think they're going to be the favorites coming into this one. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is Portland and the Colorado Rapids. So the Timbers is coming into this game with an 11-5-5 record, while Colorado, after that big win against Seattle, has all of a sudden got themselves back into the 7th position in a very good position in terms of making the playoffs with a 6-6-4 record. This game kicks off at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And speaking of which, Colorado, if they can, of course, get a win or a draw in this game against the Portland Timbers, they, of course, will officially clinch their spot into the playoffs this season, which cue a lot of people that's going to be very angry about that and the ongoing criticism that the league is going to finish the season determined by the points per game ratio. Now, for the Portland Timbers, they're actually at the top spot of the Western Conference, and they're actually at the top of the Western Conference by only 0.01 in terms of the points per game total. And that, I know for SKC fans, the last game, with the way that the last game got canceled for them, in some way they kind of got screwed in terms of that too, because, that was obviously looking more likely it was an automatic win for them against Minnesota, and that it could have improved their points per game total, but instead they did not play that game, and since they had to watch other team able to get resort and leapfrog them, they're probably very pissed off right now with the way that they should be remaining at the top spot if they would have played that game against Minnesota. But for Portland, they definitely need to know that if they want to get that top spot, they got to make sure they win games, because they don't really have a lot of margin of error of themselves, and that if they do drop points in this game, then it could really hurt their points per game total, and that SKC will all of a sudden find themselves back at the top of the Western Conference. However, it's not going to be easy against a Colorado team that that they are hungry to try to seal the playoff spot and kind of anger a lot of teams in the Western Conference by doing that. And something tells me they'll probably, in terms of the way that they're going to play in this one, they're going to try to give Portland a taste of their own medicine with the way that I think this Colorado team is probably going to try to bunker and try to play a low block against the Timbers and try to hit them on the counterattack. And, this season, the Timbers, no doubt, has done a little bit better in terms of dealing teams that try to put a low block on them, but there are times where they have still struggled in terms of that department, and there are also times where they give up late leads, as we have seen throughout the past couple of games and also earlier in this season. So, I'm going to say this is going to be a draw between both of these teams, and that I think a draw will definitely satisfy the Rapids, because, as I said, they only need to win or draw, and as long as they don't lose against Portland, they basically punch their ticket in terms of making the playoffs in the Western Conference. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be the Galaxy versus the Seattle Sounders, which will kick off at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific, so it's a bit of a late one, but this game, alongside with the next game, have a lot of playoff compression, and it's no wonder why both of these games is actually going to be kicking off simultaneously, because, there's going to be a lot of people that support these four teams that is going to go back and forth to look at their TV, especially Quakes and Galaxy fans, that I'm definitely going to keep a really good eye on this game alongside with the Quakes versus LAFC game, because for the Galaxy, even though they have a slim hope of making the playoffs, they're still technically alive in the playoff race, and that obviously in order to them to get into decision day and still have a shot in terms of making the playoff, they have to win to stay alive in the playoffs, and also hope that the Quakes would drop points against LAFC in a way that they will be staying alive in terms of potentially getting into the playoffs on decision day. Now, for the Seattle Sounders, who had a 10-5-5 record, the Sounders is currently third in the West, but as I said, since the fact that they, of course, have this game in hand and have a chance to get all 3 points in this one, they can, of course, leapfrog SKC in terms of that spot. And this also goes back to where SKC is really screwed in this situation, where they could really find themselves, just because not playing that game between them and Minnesota not only cost them to not improve on their points per game ratio, but also the fact that now other teams are going to leapfrog them, and they just have nothing to do and slide themselves into the third spot. But obviously the Sounders are looking to take advantage of this kind of unfairness against a Galaxy team that, no doubt, in the last game I thought they played much better in the last game compared to to when they were on that miserable run of just winning one game out of the last 8 and losing 7 out of the 8 games. But obviously, I think that has a lot to do with whenever you get a head coach that is fired or their assistant coach, which, believe it or not, Dominic Kinnear is actually in charge of this Galaxy team. And 2020 is weird enough when you have former Quakes head coach decide to now head coach with this LA Galaxy team, albeit it's only on an interim basis, but it's just so 2020 with the way that this, of course, is the case for the Galaxy right now. But obviously, I think, as I said, the reason why they play much better is because you ever heard of this new head coach kind of magic, where whenever a team gets a new head coach or an intern head coach, they tend to play much better and it seems to work harder because they want to prove their new interim head coach or the new head coach that is going to come in that they deserve to be in the starting 11 of this team. So we'll see if that can, of course, continue to carry against the Sounders team that no doubt they are very tired right now. I mean, in that game against Colorado, you can clearly see in the second half they were not at it whatsoever, and that at time it looked like they completely checked out with the fatigueness that they have to deal with, and that this is actually now their 5th game that they're playing in 17 days. So, yeah, the Galaxy have a big chance in terms of getting a win against a tired Sounders team. But I'm going to say it's going to be a draw in this one because, as I'm going to be talking about in the next game between the Quakes versus LAFC, which is the last game I'm going to talk about in this preview, I really hope this either ends in a Seattle win or a draw because, if the Quakes, there's 2 ways the Quakes can get into the playoffs against LAFC. The simplest way is that if they can, of course, do something that they did last time, which is somehow pull off a 2-1 shock win against LAFC, they, of course, have clinched their playoff spot. Now, if they, of course, can get a draw against LAFC, if the Galaxy or get a draw against LAFC, if the Galaxy can draw or lose versus the Seattle Sounders, they themselves also make it to the playoffs, and hence this is why I'm really keeping an eye on this one and kind of rooting for Seattle once again, and hopefully they don't let me down like they did in the last game when they lost to Colorado, and that they basically did not help our causes in terms of making the playoffs. But LAFC themselves, they also have something to play for, and that, as I mentioned, them and FC Dallas is fighting for Minnesota in terms of getting that elusive 4th spot and trying to crack the top 4 to at least get one home game that is going to be playing in the Western Conference playoff. And that, as I said, they're only points of 3 points per game ratio behind Minnesota for that 4th spot and are actually tied with Dallas in terms of the points per game. But I'm going to say this game is going to end in a draw too, and that as much as I really want the Quakes to win this one, I got to be realistic. I mean, this is going to be really tough if they going to try to pull off another miracle by getting a win against LAFC. Consider this is an LAFC side that is not going to be the same LAFC side that we play when we play against them on the road. I mean, that was an LAFC side that, while they did have some good players, they did not have Carlos Vela in that game, and that most likely he's going to be coming back in this game. And Carlos Vela is basically probably the worst nightmare in terms of Quakes fan, because he absolutely tear up again this Quakes team whenever his LAFC team play against them. And also, the other thing I want to say is that, with the fact that that's me there, but with the fact that LAFC have 3 cases of COVID from some of their players, and since we don't know exactly who actually got COVID-19, and obviously the reason why we don't know is because for confidential reason, that could be very interesting coming into this game, and I think we'll find out who exactly did get COVID, knowing how the starting 11 and also who is usually on the bench that is not on the bench in this game, and that could be a good sign of knowing who exactly is not going to be available in this one. So, yeah, this could coming into this game, this could either be a relatively easy game where maybe some of those players that got COVID was some of their their star player for LAFC, and we kind of caught a break on that, or the fact that these 3 players are probably just bench player and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But either way, I think coming into this game for the Quakes, they're probably going to try to, I know when you're playing at home, you shouldn't usually just sit back and just try to soak up pressure, but this is LAFC. Like, anytime when you face LAFC, you obviously need to basically stay on your toes, and you're going to have to try to defend and maybe try to hit them on the counterattack, because that's one of the weakness that they had, that this team does show throughout this season. So yeah, I think the Quakes, they're going to try to be pragmatic in this game, and that I won't be surprised if this game does end in a draw. It's going to be a low scoring draw, but if the Quakes are going to lose this game, yeah, this is going to be pretty much by a big margin, because I already know in terms of the history of this fixture, that when the Quakes do lose in this fixture, it's in a very bad way. But if they can get a result like they did in the last time, it's probably because of pure luck, and also the defense was organized enough to really slow down this LAFC team. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the review of, or not the review, but the preview of the 6-game action that is happening tonight. Again, I know I did this on a bit of short notice, but as I said before, there are 2 clear reasons why I am doing this right now instead of doing this yesterday. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all of these 6 games? And as always, let me know in the comments below your prediction for these 6 games that I call the opening act of Decision Day, and kind of the match week before we get into the big day of the MLS regular season, which is Decision Day, where every single team is going to be playing on that day, and there's going to be a lot of decision and a lot of scenario that is going to come true at the end of that day. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.